Hello, everyone. This is Roderick Benns, publisher of the Lindsay Advocate with YourVote 2021. I'd like to welcome Judy Forbes, Liberal candidate for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock. Hi, Judy. Nice to see you this morning.
Nice to see you too, Roderick, and thanks so much for having me on this morning.
Of course. This election features a lot of big spending, not only from a left of Liberal Party that you're running for, but even for the Conservatives. So how does the Liberal Party carve out clear policy space in this kind of election when all three major parties are promising to do so much?
Oh, you're right. There are a lot of policies, but the Liberals are focused on a number of really key areas. And the first one is to get us through this pandemic. You know, we can't move ahead in any substantial way until we sort this thing out. And the Liberals have really had the backs of Canadians through this pandemic with programs such as CERB, the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit, and the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy for small businesses. And we will continue to support Canadians. We will continue to support our businesses right through this pandemic. Fortunately, I think we're starting to understand a little bit more how to manage it in better ways. So that is good news. But we still have to be really diligent. We still have to wear our masks. We still have to get vaccinated. And we have a program in place where we are going to support those provinces who want to put in place stringent vaccine mandates. So that is, effort number one. Let's get through this pandemic, and then let's start to grow and recover from it. Let's help our small businesses grow. Let's get housing for those who really want it and really need it. Let's make it affordable. In fact, let's make life more affordable. Let's get green jobs going, more jobs going for people who, especially for people that maybe want to get out of an industry that they have been in and into maybe one of the cleaner and greener industries that we are hoping to push forward. Let's get better healthcare. We saw during this pandemic, there were some terrible tragedies in our long-term care homes. And we want to help the provinces fix that with, hiring more PSWs, making the minimum wage $25 so that they can survive on that income. In healthcare, there's a backlog. So there are a number of different policies that we want to put forward that I think are unique to the Liberal Party.
Well, you mentioned something just now. In fact, the Liberals do have big changes in store for long-term care and for those frontline PSWs. So if the Liberals want to push for PSWs to earn $25 an hour, how would they do that when it's provincial jurisdiction? And two, wouldn't that drastically push up wages for, say, nurses then too?
And you know what? That's not a bad thing to push up wages for nurses. My husband had an accident recently, and I had the opportunity to observe some of those nurses in action. And oh my gosh, those men and women work really, really hard for the salary that they make. It's really up to the federal government to push funding down to the province if there isn't enough funding for PSWs and perhaps nurses' wages. I can't commit to that. Certainly, the Liberal Party hasn't put that particular one in their platform, so please don't hold me to increasing nurses' wages. But we certainly want to make sure our PSWs are paid a good wage for the incredible work that they do.
So what other changes do the Liberals see for long-term care aside from better wages for frontline workers?
Well, it's not just that. It's putting in standards for long-term care. I am so fortunate. My mother is in a provincially funded long-term care home. She gets incredible care by the staff there. And it gives me such peace of mind to know that she is well cared for. But there are other homes that people are not as well cared for, and there need to be standards. Unfortunately, the provincial Conservative government wasn't following up on care homes and wasn't doing the inspections that needed to be done to ensure that people were being cared for in a positive way. So that's something that the federal government has committed to do.
What are your personal 3 favorite policy planks that the Liberals are running on in this election?
Oh, well, I am absolutely in line with getting us through this pandemic and recovering. And I spoke a lot about that earlier, but really, I own a small business. I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to start up. I know what it's like to make payroll. So I really want to help our small businesses grow and survive. That is a big one in my mind. I think where we are heads and tails over any other party is climate change. We have one of the most aggressive climate change plans in the world. It's fully costed, fully vetted, and the other parties are nowhere near us. The Washington Post called the NDP plan fantasy land, and the Conservatives are going to pay you to burn more fossil fuel. So they don't hold a candle to the climate plan that the Liberals have put in place. And then there is a program that is really near and dear to my heart. It's not in the Liberal platform, but I know that many Liberal MPs are hoping to push this forward, and that is the Universal Basic Income Program. It's something that the provincial Liberals put in place right here in Lindsay, and it was promised by the Conservatives that it would continue, and it was one of the first things that they scrapped. I know that universal basic income helped so many people in this community, help them through a bout of disability, or help them to learn a new skill or go back to school before they went back into the workforce. It was an incredible success. And you know what? The CERB program, the Canadian Emergency Wage Relief Benefit, rather, has shown us that it can really work. So it's, as I said, it's not in the official Liberal platform, but it's something that I personally, when elected as Member of Parliament, would take forward and join the other Liberal voices in Parliament to make that a reality.
That's great. Yes, it's certainly been endorsed quite highly by the Liberal membership every time there's a policy convention, but it has yet to be taken up by the party itself.
Maybe it just needs one more voice.
Right. Tell us more about the small business recovery plan that the Liberals are pushing if they get reelected.
Well, one of the things that the Liberals are doing is a subsidy to help employers either hire more workers or raise the income of the workers that they have. And I've heard it when I've been knocking on doors and talking to business people that they're having trouble getting workers. And that may be that the wages for some of these folks are quite low, and maybe they just need a little bit more to make it worth their while to go back to work. So that would significantly help small businesses. The other thing that will help small businesses is we are working on funding people to go into the trade. So helping them with schooling and to learn a new skill, which will help our construction industry is behind, I think, in getting a lot of new construction and renovations done. And it may be for lack of skilled workers. So we're going to help them get skilled workers.
Well, it's a bit surprising that we don't have pharmacare by now. It was a signature election promise in 2019, and it feels like the Liberals just hastily mentioned it again in their last budget. Why isn't the will there to get this done?
Oh, you know what, Roderick? I think there is the will there to get this done. And certainly an agreement has been made between the federal government and the province of Prince Edward Island as a pilot on pharmacare. So, it's something that we have to work with the provinces in order to put in place. And it's something that they are pushing forward on. So, I think we will, with a strong Liberal government going forward, I think we will see it over the next few years right across Canada.
Okay, well, what's it like campaigning during what is still a pandemic? How are you finding things, say, compared to the last election?
You know what? We're a lot more careful. That's for sure. When I'm knocking on doors, we go up to a home, we knock on the door. We always wear our masks. We take a giant step backwards so that we always social distance between whoever is coming to the door and ourselves. But people have been very receptive. They've been wonderful actually at the door, and most of them will tell me, oh, I've been double vaccinated, I'm okay. I go, so am I, but you never know. This Delta variant is a nasty, nasty thing, and we have to continue to be vigilant with it.
Well, aside from the pandemic, how does this campaign feel different from your last federal campaign?
Whoa. It's quite different. It is, we're doing in 5 weeks what we did in 5 months last time. So there's a bit of a race going on. It also feels, and I don't think anybody will be surprised to hear this, it feels like a little bit of the nastiness that you see in US politics has kind of oozed over the border a little bit. We've seen it when the Prime Minister has campaigned. We've seen behavior that is not Canadian. It's not acceptable. And I hear it from other candidates, a lot of them female candidates, who have had a lot of aggression towards them, and I felt it too here in this riding. So yeah, it's certainly different in that way.
Judy, can you give us an example of how you've experienced it as well? Is it from, say, knocking on a door and then you're not getting very pleasant feedback? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, there've been rude gestures made towards me. There've been 4-letter words shouted at me, that kind of thing. It always shocks me. It always shocks me because I come from I grew up in a small town, and that wasn't what we did. Those aren't the values that I have. I'm confident they aren't the values that the vast majority of Canadians have. So it's it always shocks me. So but I know it's not a Canadian value. It's not a value that Canadians hold dear. So I know it's just a small group of obviously very, very angry people.
What have you learned about yourself during these past few weeks campaigning?
Oh, I think whenever you do anything that's a little bit outside of your comfort zone, you grow in ways you never realized. I have learned I can function on a lot less sleep. I learned I learned that I am even more passionate about the policies and the programs of the Liberal Party than I ever was before. Um, I know, and I'm absolutely confident that they are the right party to take us forward. So, I think when you're out of your comfort zone, you realize you're a lot stronger than you think you are.
Thanks, Judy. And what's something, just lastly, that voters might not know about you, perhaps an interest or hobby that you have?
Well, I am, in my spare time, I like to golf and I like to travel. They may not know that I have 4 adult children that I am incredibly proud of. Interestingly enough, all 4 children are entrepreneurs themselves. So they operate their own businesses. And, it's funny because my husband and I both were in finance. We were both bankers, and you'd think that we would grow a whole crop of bankers, but no, no, they all wanted to go into business for themselves. So maybe that's a little something about me that folks don't know.
That's great to see the entrepreneurial spirit. Thanks, Judy. We appreciate your time today. I'd like to welcome Jamie Schmell, Conservative candidate for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock. Jamie, nice to see you.
Thank you again. Nice to see you as well.
You've been an MP for 6 years now, but Aaron O'Toole is the third leader you've run under after Stephen Harper and Andrew Scheer. How does this election feel different in style and substance under your new leader?
Well, first of all, I think this is an election that nobody really wanted. We're approaching what looks to be a fourth wave of the pandemic. We have fires burning in many parts of the country. And just as the campaign kicked off, there was a major development in Afghanistan. And that is something I think this prime minister will have to answer for. But having said that, we're in the campaign now. And I think it seems different because I think people are taking a step back now that kids are back in school, as we start to reopen businesses, as we slowly figure out what the next steps are. They're paying attention to politics again. And they're starting to realize that some of the promises made by Justin Trudeau haven't been followed through on, and others haven't really benefited them at all. They're dealing with inflation that continues to rise, the cost of living getting out of control, paychecks not growing as they should, not to mention the trade issues that we have and many others across the country. So it is certainly, like I said, not something we wanted, but now that we're in it, I think people are taking a step back and looking at what's going on.
I guess what I'm getting at is that this election features a lot of big spending, not only from the left of center Liberal Party, as we've seen for years, but even your party, the Conservatives. You came out and supported Aaron O'Toole early in the leadership race when he was running clearly to the right of the political spectrum. But now he's clearly running a campaign that's centrist, more like Brian Mulroney's approach in the 80s and 90s. What's your comfortability like with that big change?
Well, I think the 5 points that we're running on are very strong, including, like you mentioned, the issue regarding spending that the federal government is doing, basically doubling what we are taking in is going out the door. And that's causing, in large part, the inflation problems that we're having now. We are flooding the market with currency made up by the stroke of a key by the Bank of Canada. And we're diluting our currency, causing the prices that we're seeing in real estate and appliances, groceries, you name it, that is starting to go up. So we have said we're going to take a responsible approach to this, balance the budget in 10 years or less. I'm thinking it'll take in between 5 and 7, depending on how the fourth wave of the pandemic goes and what measures are needed to keep people safe and businesses going. But I think at this pace, I think it's comfortable to say within 10 years. Now, the Liberals have said 2070 is when they're going to balance the budget, which is clearly unsustainable going forward. We're going to have massive amounts of debt, massive amounts of problems for our future generations who will have to pay for this. And then they will probably have to make the tough decision between service cuts or tax increases. And I don't think anyone believes that there's ways or areas where we can tax more. I think people are stretched to the limit. So there are other issues on our platform that we're running on that I'm quite proud of, including increasing the transfers to the provinces in the form of healthcare funding. We're going to the current 3% up to now 6%. And as you mentioned, the spending decisions that are going to be made, that is something that needed to be done, I think, before the pandemic. I think I pointed out to you and others about that. There was massive amounts of spending that was done over and above the wage subsidy and the rent program and the business loans meant to keep people and businesses afloat and safe. But there was lots of other things that were couched in the language of COVID that had nothing to do with COVID. And if it was truly a healthcare crisis, then why wasn't healthcare funding increased more than the 3% already scheduled increase. And so we've said, yes, we're going to address that. We're going to bring it up to 6%. And that way provinces are able to have more money, more resources available to them to address and respond to this pandemic accordingly.
Jamie, you brought up balancing the budget, that the Conservatives would do so anywhere between 5 and 10 years. Hasn't your leader said that there would be no tax increases? I'm just wondering how that's possible.
Well, like I said, the other part is looking at where the spending has been going. And as I mentioned, a lot of the spending outside the wage subsidy, the rent program, the wage subsidy, CERB, there was a lot more spending that was couched in the language of COVID that had absolutely nothing to do with COVID. So we're going to go through that and look at that. We're also going to get rid of programs like the Infrastructure Bank that has had very little to next to no success, that has cost billions of dollars. Things like the Asian Infrastructure Bank. Why are we spending taxpayer dollars in China to build pipelines when we can't do that here? So there are areas we can cut back. There are areas we can look at for review. And I think when you double the federal budget and start to spend more than what you're taking in, there are areas that you can look at and whether or not it's being effective. A lot of times government measures success in how much money they spend. I think I'd rather measure it in results.
I didn't hear you say anything there about growth as another means of achieving these deficit and debt targets. What could the Conservatives do from that standpoint?
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, in terms of what we're going to do to help small businesses grow, of course, you have the GST holiday in December, specifically targeted so that individuals spend their money on the main street, on bricks and mortar stores. Typically in this pandemic, in a lot of cases, it varies from province to province, but here in Ontario, small businesses have taken the brunt of a lot of this pandemic and with the lockdown. So this is a way to incentivize people to keep their dollars local, to spend it on your main streets, not go to the Amazons of the world or the other internet providers and the big tech companies. Let's keep those dollars local. Let's support our small businesses. And also there are programs available to help incentivize people to get back to work, including a subsidy to help pay the wages of someone who has been off work for 6 months or more. There are other programs to help small businesses get off the ground. So we've tried to form our campaign not only on keeping people safe and helping the healthcare funding, but also knowing that people are going to have to get back to work when safe to do so and responsibly. And we want those small businesses, especially in our area that functions mostly on small businesses, to be there and remain strong.
What are your personal 3 favorite policy planks that the Tories are running on in this election?
One of my personal favorites is the mental health. I think prior to pandemic, mental health was always an issue. It just really wasn't addressed appropriately. As I think we all know, and sadly through this pandemic, it has grown to an area where it needs attention, and unfortunately it took a pandemic to do this. So we're going to really focus on addressing mental health and treating mental health what it should be, and that is in the healthcare sphere, and that includes Indigenous mental health and providing funding accordingly, and also helping people access through the provinces, of course, access the professional help they need if they need it. But I think that was number 1. Number 2 is, of course, cleaning up Ottawa, the corruption that's gone on in Ottawa. We've seen the We Charity, we've seen SNC Lavalin, and the list goes on. We want to ensure that there are anti-corruption laws in place so that this never happens again. Politicians shouldn't be using Ottawa as a opportunity to get rich or reward their friends and punish their enemies. That's completely unacceptable. So we're going to look at that. The other thing is securing our country, which looks at bringing manufacturing back to Canada. What does this mean? How do we do it, right? We have seen, unfortunately, this pandemic has shown that other countries that we rely on for our manufacturing has not always been kind, and we've seen shortages because of that. So ensuring that rules, regulations, red tape are at a reasonable level and not overwhelming businesses, but also encouraging those that want to start up to get there. I think in Canada, most would agree there is money for small startups. There is more money for going from medium to large, but there's very little in the terms of access from small to medium. And I think we need to focus on that, because we don't want these companies that start up, that develop a product or services, that the larger companies see as a threat to their competition, that they buy up and sometimes just let die off. And that's unfortunate. It's not healthy to our competitive economy either. So we want to get those people, those business owners, from small to medium, so that they can then go to medium to large if they so choose, and if their business model achieves that.
You talk about bringing manufacturing back, but that seems a bit unrealistic in terms of writ large manufacturing. And are you really only talking about targeted areas then, as in, say, PPE production or vaccines?
Yes, our platform does specifically talk about manufacturing of PPE and that sort of thing, and ensuring that we are, with our domestic supply, able to produce vaccines and the PPE protective equipment. Sorry. But also, just on a local priority for me, I'd like to see our manufacturing remain strong and get even stronger. And that includes creating an environment that allows the private sector growth to succeed and start up and ensure that they are able to do so. We have a number of challenges in this province. We pay some of the highest electricity prices anywhere in North America, and that is a challenge. That is a very real challenge. But I think by working together to figure out a way to keep those taxes low, the rules, regulations, and red tape at a reasonable level, so that it doesn't stifle those companies from starting up or moving to a different jurisdiction to complete their work. We want to keep those jobs here, keep that money here, and start to produce in this economy.
Tell us more about the gun control plans that the Conservatives have in mind. I'm reading a lot of conflicting reports in the national media. Would the Conservative Party support the existing ban on assault rifles?
Well, I think we've said that of course, first of all, we need to define assault rifle, right? Is it continuous fire? If that is the case, they've been banned in Canada for decades. I think the 1970s, they were banned here in Canada. We obviously support responsible firearms ownership. We also think that the government has done a very poor job of actually targeting where the firearm issue is. And a lot of that is with gang activity. And in many cases, it's in the urban areas. And we know that even in Nova Scotia, every single firearm that the individual used in that massacre, that tragedy, was smuggled illegally over the border. He did not have a firearms license. And we have said for many years, the border is where we need to tighten things up. Illegal drugs are getting through, illegal firearms are getting through. And if you look at what's happening in our cities, a lot of the shootings that are happening with handguns illegally smuggled over the border. And the fact that the government has basically turned a blind eye to that has meant that our shootings have gone up. The violent crime has gone up. The Liberals are also reducing the sentences that judges are able to give to people that commit a violent crime with the use of a firearm, illegal or otherwise. And we think that's wrong. So our plan is going to talk about stopping the redundant policies, like in Bill C-71, that unfairly punish law-abiding firearms owners, while at the same time looking at the actual causes of crime. And I know it's easy politics to say we're going to get rid of this, but until you actually address how the firearms are getting in, where the shootings are coming from, and all that goes with it, you're never going to solve the problems. We're just going to give, unfortunately, people a false sense of security.
The Liberal Party is saying they have big changes in store for long-term care and for frontline PSWs, with plans to ensure they're paid $25 an hour. Can you tell us what the Conservatives would do to support the long-term care sector?
Sure. Our plan differs in a number of ways. Long-term care, I think, has been a black eye right across the world. I think the images we saw coming out of Italy and Spain and others when the pandemic first hit were absolutely tragic and shocking. And I think it really made people pay attention to what was going on. And we've seen it here in our own riding as well. So although long-term care is under provincial jurisdiction, the plan that we have that will see $60 billion over 5 years to go directly into healthcare gives the provinces that ability to start moving in areas that they feel are worthy of attention. And I think, as we mentioned, mental health, we talked about long-term care, we talked about other issues in terms of, emergency room, ICU capacity, that sort of thing, giving the provinces maximum flexibility, the ability to look at what they need and giving them the resources is where our plan. A number of provinces are already looking at upping the wages on a number of these workers. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And I hope to work with them in achieving those goals.
And your party doesn't support specified pockets of healthcare funding. Is that correct? You're not going to mandate that those dollars be a certain amount of dollars spent in long-term care, a certain amount in mental health and so on.
Well, we're trying to give the provinces maximum flexibility, but we are looking at, like I said, the mental health aspect. There are specific pockets of money for mental health. There is specific pockets of money for other pieces of the healthcare puzzle. We hope to encourage provinces to invest in long-term care and invest in the care of the seniors. And but also it's also the resource issue that I think the provinces have been saying for quite some time. That has been the issue.
What's it like campaigning in what is still a pandemic?
It's been different. I got to tell you, there has been a few more Zoom meetings than I've ever had before in a campaign. I think most people are aware that the campaign is going on and do want to engage. I think there are people who are a little worried about the pandemic who stay behind the door, but I think people in whole are glad that teams are out and starting to meet them and actually talking to them again. And I think that's a good thing. And we do it as safely as possible and as respectfully as possible.
Have you been knocking on doors yourself?
I have. The team and I have been covering a lot of area, a lot of ground, a lot of good response. And it's been, like I said, different, but still fun to get out. And the weather, of course, at 40 degrees wasn't exactly very nice, but we got through it and the team's been great.
I guess lastly, Jamie, what's something that voters might not know about you, maybe an interest or a hobby you have?
Well, you and I used to work together as journalists. I don't know if that happened. Pre-COVID, I was a lot thinner, so I used to run a lot, and I'm trying to get back into that. Of course, grew up in Bobcaygeon, live in Lindsay now. Used to play hockey and was part of the Bobcaygeon Cougars 1991-92 All-Ontario Bantam Finals. And of course, we saw Bobcaygeon vie for a potential new arena, or at least $250,000 worth of upgrades. They unfortunately didn't win, but it was good to don the Bobcaygeon Cougar jacket again and help lobby for votes to get them there. And otherwise, I have a 10-year-old son. He goes to school in Lindsay. It's first day of school and this week, and really excited about that. But otherwise, back to the pavement we go. Keep knocking on doors.
Thanks, Jamie. We appreciate your time today. And we thank Jamie Schmell, candidate for the Conservative Party, for making time for us. I'd like to welcome Zach Miller, NDP candidate for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock. Zach, good to see you today.
Thanks for having me.
Your party has been hammering away at the idea of a wealth tax, saying the rich need to pay their fair share. But in 1990, 12 countries in Europe had a wealth tax, and today there are only 3. Do they really work?
Well, I think that over the last 30 years in Western countries like Canada, we have seen a mass redistribution of wealth to the top. Middle class taxes continue to rise, municipal taxes continue to go up, property taxes, and corporate tax rates go down. They're able to accumulate a lot of wealth unchecked. So I think it is time that we introduce a wealth tax on assets over $10 million in Canada, so that we can afford some of the social programs, the human infrastructure that we need to recover post-COVID-19.
Perhaps that's part of the difference too. In some of those European examples, like in France, I believe the tax was only on the so-so wealthy. I think what NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is saying is that we want to do it on the super wealthy, and maybe that's part of the difference.
Exactly. The folks who can absolutely afford 1 cent on every dollar over $10 million. I think that's acceptable, and I think most of Canadians and folks in Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock will benefit from.
This election seems to feature a lot of big spending, not only from a left of center Liberal Party, but even the Conservatives. So How does the NDP carve out clear policy space in this kind of election?
Well, I think it's all about connecting and listening to folks in the country and what they actually need, right? We're not going to do half measures, but we need to do full measures in order to enrich people's lives around the country. So when we talk about childcare, we want to make sure that we are able to build new spaces, make sure that the ECEs are paid a fair living wage, and that there are those spaces available for families at $10 a day when they need them. I mean, our policies are very comprehensive. They touch all corners of an issue rather than doling out specific money just to sound good. I mean, pharmacare and dental care, like we're really rounding out the healthcare policies that we need. So I think it does resonate with folks here in our riding, and we've been hearing it at the doors that they appreciate the depth that we've been able to achieve in terms of our platform for the 2021 election.
You mentioned childcare, but that's kind of a signature Liberal promise as well. So
well, it's been a Liberal promise since the 1990s, right? And when you continue to promise something, election after election, I don't think one gets to own a certain policy. And I think the NDP policy is pretty well-rounded and will help folks and families save money on childcare so that they can invest their money in different things.
What are your personal 3 favorite policy planks that the NDP is running on in this election?
My first priority would be to remove profit from long-term care and implement national standards of accountability, meaningful input, a minimum standard of care, comfortable living, as well as equity policies within long-term care. After the devastation that happened in Bob-Cajun in early 2020, long-term care desperately needs reform, and I think that the private corporations have lost the right to run those facilities. Another plank would be implementing a Green New Deal, making sure that workers are protected in a switch while we dramatically reduce our emissions by at least 50%, while also reworking the way we interact with one another and the way we travel, and protecting our waterways and green space. And the last plank that I would, campaign heavily on is taxing the rich and redistributing the wealth back to us, and making sure that students and youth are able to rebound coming out of this pandemic and actually start investing their money in our local economies.
So when I hear Green New Deal, I inevitably think about Alberta, and I think about the oil sands, and I think a lot of Canadians would do that as well. How do you see that manifesting in here in this riding? How can someone in this riding wrap their minds around what that could look like in Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock?
Well, first of all, we've been seeing the smoke advisories here in our riding, right, from Northern Ontario and from BC that are on fire, and that is human-induced climate change, right? And I think once we really revolutionize our energy system, it will provide for opportunities for folks in Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock and Ontario to work in this industry and retrain and make sure that they have those good paying jobs that they may not have now. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for our area to regain the industry that we once had. Kawartha Lakes built itself even in the 80s on the industrial heartland of Ontario, right? And now we don't see that today. You go up Colborne Street East and it's not really there. So I think there's tremendous opportunities for all corners in the ride and Haliburton to provide those good paying jobs and opportunities for communities and municipalities to even invest in that infrastructure themselves.
So what's it like campaigning during what is still obviously a pandemic? Do you wear a mask when you knock on someone's door, or do you knock and just step back? How do you personally handle that?
Yeah, it's not too much of a challenge. We all our volunteers wear masks, and when we do knock on the door, we do take a step back or two, and we just interact that way. Many people aren't aren't concerned in that regard. We are taking all the safety precautions, and most put on masks when they answer the door once they see who we are, and while we interact for a few minutes. So it's not really a big issue in terms of talking to people. I mean, it's just sad that we're in an election, and now the Ontario government has prorogued the legislature when we are in a fourth wave.
Yeah, I just thought it'd be important for a prospective voter to see a candidate's face. So I was wondering how you handle that if you have to be masked up.
Yeah, so I mean, and we're making a lot more phone calls. Some of our volunteers feel more safe just staying home, so we give them a call list and they can volunteer that way.
Well, aside from the pandemic, how does this campaign feel different from your provincial campaign in 2018? Maybe tell us what it's like shifting from the provincial to the federal political arena.
I definitely think there's really no difference into how what policies I believe in and what I've been championing over the last 3 years. What we have seen is our multiple provincial governments fail in terms of protecting healthcare workers and protecting seniors, and throughout this entire pandemic, out in Alberta or even Ontario. So I think the opportunity is now for a federal government, for the central government, to step in and mandate to these provinces who aren't doing their duty to care for their population to provide guidance and federal money in order to get it done. If Doug Ford doesn't want to remove profit from long-term care, I think it's on the federal government to enact that and force him to do that. And that's something that I've been campaigning, or not campaigning, but knocking on doors for the last 3 years. And I think the federal election is the perfect opportunity in order to get some substantial change in the community.
It still seems to me that there'd be quite a few differences, given that provincial politics is so much closer to the people than, say, federal. Mm-hmm. But I guess the difference is, for the NDP, they're advocating for quite a larger role for the federal government, aren't they, like in long-term care? For
sure. And I mean, I think in order for people to really get in touch with their federal government is by direct federal monies coming to our municipalities in order to invest in services that we've lost, say up in Kawartha Lakes, northern Kawartha Lakes. Fire services have been cut to where there's only one large fire truck. So I mean, having federal monies come to municipalities for them to invest in those initial services will allow for more opportunities with the provincial government as well. And this is, rework. We need to really revolutionize on how we interact with our government and how we see our government interacting with us. And that means being more comfortable with receiving monies from the federal government to do the things that we want as a municipality who are cash strapped in lots of ways.
Yes, federal governments certainly have most of the taxation power, most of the monies. It does already seem to be a constant for provinces to be asking for more money, but with no strings attached. I guess that's part of the difference.
Well, exactly. I mean, like, even when you look at housing, right? The CMHC, the Housing Corporation, the Crown Corporation, doesn't actually give money to the municipalities anymore for them to plan according to their targets with multiple different styles of homes that are affordable. So I would want to rework the CMHC so that federal dollars can go to municipalities so that they can implement them with their growth targets set over the decade, right? So, and I think there's multiple ways that the federal government interacts with the daily lives of people that we just don't actually recognize openly.
What have you learned about yourself during these past few weeks campaigning?
Well, I mean, I love talking to people, so I knew I was going into that, and just seeing the breadth of ideas that people have, even within our own volunteer base, on how we can actually achieve some of these things. So, I mean, I wouldn't have learned too much about myself that I already didn't know. We just have to keep energized and keep knocking on as many doors as possible, making phone calls, and really listening to people, because there are so many policy issues that connect all of us. regardless of party line. And I think it's really about looking into that and talking to people and figuring out what those similarities are and how we can go forward from there.
One of those connecting policy ideas that you've mentioned before in this interview, it seems to me that the NDP have a lot of health related policies they want to bring in, and that strikes me as something that connects all of us, and maybe that's why the NDP is focused on that.
For sure. I mean, even like pharmacare, right? It takes the strain off of businesses who are providing that private coverage for their workers. So by implementing a national pharmacare plan from the government, it relieves that stress from the businesses that they can then put back into their operations, or even raise the wages of their employees. So yeah, it's a lot of different angles that you can talk to people about, and it's interesting to see where they all lie.
What's something that voters might not know about you, perhaps an interest or a hobby you have, so they can get to know you a bit personally?
Yeah, I mean, over the last 3 years, I have a real, I've developed my passion for our local history of the former Victoria County, now Kawartha Lakes. I've, volunteered on the board of the museum in Lindsay, and that is one of my passions and what I'm pursuing education-wise. So, I mean, I love researching that, looking at what worked, what hasn't worked, different levels of government, different campaigns, all the way back in the 1800s into contemporarily. So no, yeah, local history, love it. And I don't know if a lot of people know that.
That's great. Thanks, Zach. And I appreciate you joining us today, Zach Miller from the NDP. I'd like to welcome Angel Godso, Green Party candidate for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes-Brock. Angel, nice to see you.
Hi, good to see you too, Roderick.
Tell me, what are your personal 3 favorite policy planks that the Greens are running on in this election?
Well, my first one is, of course, the environment. I hope that it's on everybody's mind. We really need to make and meet or exceed, if we can, our promises to the world to reduce our carbon footprint as a country. We promised in the Paris Accord that we would do that, and the Green Party is the only party that is going to meet or exceed those promises. The second one is our social policies. As we recover from this pandemic, we want to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind. And the Green Party has a platform that includes a basic income for everybody, a livable income. And that is what we need to implement that. There's been too much red tape in the past and hoops for people to jump through. And we are leaving people behind. We're leaving small businesses behind, and we're leaving individuals behind. The Green Party is going to meet those needs. And my third favorite, I guess you would say, I guess it's kind of tied to the environment, and it's also more relevant to our constituency, is the development of environmentally sensitive lands. And I think that's really important, that as we expand our housing, as we expand our industry, that we do it in an environmentally sensitive manner.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask you, why is the guaranteed livable income, also known as a basic income, why is that one so important to you?
It's important because it is fundamental for progress. People can't think about things like the environment or school, healthcare. All those needs need to be met before we can progress as a society. If people are worried about where their next meal is coming from, they're not worried about recycling or, their carbon emissions or the tax they pay on their gas, or, those things are really secondary when you don't know where your next meal is coming from or how you're going to pay the rent.
I see. Thanks. It's kind of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs sort of situation, where if we don't have that first foundation figured out, then it's hard to aspire to much more then.
Absolutely.
So what's a dominant theme that you're hearing when you're knocking on doors or getting out into the communities? What are people frustrated or concerned about?
People are really thinking about the economy. Actually, a lot of people are thinking about housing. Housing is a big thing. And I know a lot of that is legislated provincially. But I'm hearing that theme. I'm hearing that people are either worried about the skyrocketing price of real estate or the skyrocketing price of rents. That's what I'm hearing.
Housing is such a concern in this area, and I think there is a role for the federal government in the past to be in the housing game. Does the Green Party have any specific plans to do with the housing file that they think they can, how they think they can make this better?
Definitely. We want to encourage more cooperative housing at a grassroots level. And then at a higher level, we want to put caps on foreign investment. I don't know if caps is necessarily the word, but regulate. We want to regulate more foreign investment and, you know, just the reasons we want to regulate why housing is, why real estate is just going over the top and becoming unaffordable to many people.
Okay, now nationally, the Green Party seems to be polling much lower than it did in previous years, and one can't help but think it's due to the much publicized infighting at the top. How's that affected your local campaign in terms of what you're hearing from people?
I have heard that people are not necessarily dissatisfied with the leader, but dissatisfied with the drift from our original values. So our original values were based on moving forward and not dwelling on individual differences or matters of opinion or yeah, just we've drifted from our original values, and I think we need to get back to that.
Given that you're a farmer, what has the reaction been like in the agricultural community of this area to your running for the Greens?
People are concerned about the development that's happening everywhere. Like so many communities are being bought up by developers. Farmland is being developed at an exponential rate. And I feel it needs to be regulated. Yeah, and that's.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Have you talked to a lot of farmers in the agricultural community, even your immediate community? And I'm just wondering what they think of your candidacy for the Green Party.
I think farmers have a perception, some farmers have a misconception that the Green Party would put unfair, stringent regulations on them as far as pesticide use and herbicide use. And that may or may not be accurate, but I think people are not necessarily looking at the big picture, whereas we want to protect agriculture. And I really want to get the message out that no, we're not here against agriculture or farming practices. We want to help. You know, we want to further things. What we really would like to see is more incentives to support farmers so that they can farm year round, so that they don't have to have extra other jobs. A lot of farmers have to have another job to have a farm. And the Green Party would like to see a focus on farming, whereas we can be more self-sustaining and have those farms expanded, have greenhouse operations expanded, have year-round produce locally grown available for every community.
I don't think a lot of people realize that farmers sometimes need to take an extra job to make ends meet. I don't think that's in the scope of most people's thinking when they think about agriculture, considering it's number one in our community, it's number one, and then tourism.
Yeah, they do. Often it is one or other of the partners is doing the farming and another job. And definitely, we've gotten away from the traditional mom is at home and, bringing meals out to the field, harvest and all that kind of stuff. No, mom is, being a PSW. No, we want to support farmers more so that they can focus on agriculture and expand.
Okay, what's it been like campaigning for you during what is still a pandemic? What's that been like?
It's been tricky, but I have found the reception very encouraging. Yeah, like just, going out to places like public parks and speaking to people who are out walking around. And one great thing about the timing, there's a lot of bad things about the timing of this election, but one great thing has been the weather and the ability to be out and meet people in, just outside, right? We can do that.
Have you done much door knocking or mainly in community
No,
spaces?
I actually, the only door knocking I've done is that people who have ordered signs, I'll knock on those doors. Yeah.
What have you learned about yourself during these past few weeks as you've been campaigning?
Not so much about myself, but I've learned about campaigning in another aspect that I didn't learn in 2019. Just how far you got to spread yourself. Like I've just been spread so thin. It's really, I just thank God for my family and how supportive they've been, because I am a farmer and I have chores at home, like daily chores twice a day. And they've really had to pick up the slack. So, that's been something that I've learned, how dependent I really am on my family.
What's something that voters might not know about you? Maybe an interest or a hobby you have, if you can possibly squeeze one in with the farming and your political activism.
I am passionate about horses, and I don't know if people know this, but that is if people want to know what my occupation is, I run a riding stable, and I really feel that horses play such an underrated role in people's overall well-being. People that are fortunate enough to be exposed to horses, it's just such a wonderful thing. I got into it about 20 years ago. I had an opportunity to bring horses into the city, into Toronto actually, and these little kids would come up to me and say, "Can we touch them?" And it was just so foreign to me that these children hadn't been exposed to domesticated farm animals. Like it was amazing, that I could share that with them, that experience.
Well, that's great. We appreciate your time today, and we thank Angel Godso, candidate for the Green Party, for making time for us.